Giulio Prisco, welcome back to NEOHUMAN podcast, this time the 98th episode, sir.
Thank you very much for having me again. I enjoyed our last conversation last year.
Yes, indeed. It was right after the first launch of astronauts with SpaceX reusable rocket, which I know that...
It was indeed.
Yeah, I know you're very adamant in following what's going on with respect to space exploration and SpaceX and all that. And that was my second launch that I saw, and I recently just saw my fifth launch, which every single time it really is a spiritual experience, which again is good to talk to you because you're talking about science, technology, but also about spirituality and religious aspect of what is going on in our civilization. So congratulations for your new book, which is the main reason we're having this discussion. Futurist Spaceflight Meditations, which came out recently, I believe, and it's available on Amazon and everywhere else that digital and printed books are available. And audiobook, is it also available?
No, not audiobook
not
yet.
So we're gonna
also because I understand that many people like audiobook. The things here I love reading so very much that for me depriving myself of the pleasure of reading written words is unthinkable. And but I do know that many people like audiobooks.
Yeah.
By the way, let me just get a copy of the book.
I also show it as we talk about it. Yeah, wonderful. And this is a follow-up. Would it be fair to say that this is a follow-up to your first book, Tales of the Turing Church?
It's much less general. I prefer to say that it is a zoom on one chapter in Tales of the Turing Church, the chapter where I discuss space exploration. And since I believe that chapter is one of the most important in Tales of the Turing Church, I thought to expand it in a standalone book.
We're definitely going to talk about it, but as I mentioned before we start recording, about going public, I want to talk to you about a blog post that you had that the title is, I have resigned from the IEET Board of Directors. Would you mind if I read just the beginning of your post, just so our audience can have some kind of opinion?
I was kind of hoping to avoid that, but anyway, let's go. Please do.
I have resigned from the Board of Directors of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, IEET. I have resigned in protest against a recent decision which hasn't been publicly announced yet. Like much of today's liberal left, the IEET has embraced certain currently fashionable but dangerously toxic trends, identity politics, Me Too, cancel culture. These trends start with good sentiments but become toxic and dangerous when pushed to unreasonable and often ridiculous extremes. And the reason I wanted to start with this is because I believe that what's going on with respect to underlaying of technological debate and developments that we are dealing with, there is a war of ethos. There is a war of philosophical aspect of what it is that we are doing, what is the purpose of it, where we are headed, and why we are doing what we are doing. And so I think this is related because in many fields, especially AI ethics, this is almost entirely occupied by people who are coming from that political perspective, that philosophical perspective, that you can call it far left, extreme left, whatever you want to call it. So liberal left, as you're calling it. So I just want you to very generally talk a little about it before we get into your book, just so we know what was the problem with this organization. Not exactly, but just let's hear it from you.
Okay, and as a matter of fact, I do discuss these things in the book as well. And my last book, Futurist Spaceflight Meditation, is one of the very few writings in which I have gone into any kind of detail about what I think of what's happening in the world of politics and especially culture. I don't really like to discuss these things, and in fact, I almost never write about this for essentially two reasons. The first is that it's a complete waste of time, because as things are today, you will not persuade anyone when discussing politics and culture wars. Nobody will persuade you. What will happen instead is that you will start calling each other names, and I just don't have the time for that. It's a complete waste of time. I prefer to dedicate my time to other things. But there is also another reason why I'm kind of reluctant to discuss these things, and it is that, the world in which we live today is so toxically polarized. For example, in the United States, we have a situation where 40% of the people hate and are hated by the other 40%. It's a very heated situation. It's not good. It's not healthy. It's not something that can lead us anywhere good. So I kind of feel that my responsibility as a citizen is to stay away from this debate. I don't want to contribute to blowing on a fire that could become a very dangerous one. So that I normally stay out of these things. In my writings, I focus on other things. In my social media posts on Facebook and Twitter, I also focus on other things. I almost entirely ignore politics, just like every now and then. Because, I think this is the responsible thing to do. Let's just talk of something else, and let's just discuss something else. Now, concerning this IEET episode, let's just say that there was a decision taken by a very narrow majority vote by the rest of the board. And I did not agree at all with this decision. My disagreement was so strong that I resigned from the board. And I was kind of sad of doing that because, I had been one of the co-founders of the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies back in 2004. And I was full of enthusiasm at that time because I thought the Institute would really amount to something one day. But now that it has fallen to cancel culture, I don't think it's likely to go anywhere. And here again, I have better things to do with my time. And so I preferred to part ways as friendly as possible, of course. But I was just not interested in continuing to be part of that organization. Now, coming to what exactly was the episode that prompted me to resign from the IEET, I'm not at liberty to say. And I'm not at liberty to say it because it was a discussion among the board of an organization. And the discussion led to a decision that has never been communicated to the public, as far as I am aware. So that, since it's not a public decision, I'm not at liberty to comment on it. Now, of course, many people have guessed correctly exactly what decision I was talking about. And let's just say that it is not that difficult to guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of us want to leave politicization alone just so we can do the stuff that we like. But the problem is that the politicization by totalitarians is not leaving us alone, to do whatever we want to do. So everything is being politicized. And I think it goes back to, again, a discussion that we had the first time that we talked about. I think we disagreed with respect to, for example, Mormon Transhumanist Association, that you said that it's actually a beneficial thing for religions to adopt into, or religions to adopt a modern technological kind of a framework within themselves. And this seems to be the same thing, that certain kind of people from certain political perspectives, they are basically monopolizing on their ethos, on their perspective, and then using technology in order to empower that. And this is affecting every single one of us, ultimately. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to start with this.
I can agree with that. And there is also another reason why one, unfortunately, cannot keep so far from politics as one would wish. It is when the things that really interest you depend on political decisions that may or may not be made. And this is exactly the case of spaceflight. And this is the reason why I do discuss political and cultural issues in my book. Because, it's very good that private spaceflight operators like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are doing all the wonderful things that they are doing. But I'm not too optimistic when it comes to their ability to do these things, not only without government support, but even in presence of some kind of opposition from the political world. And this is very likely a risk that we will be facing. You are reading, of course, all this declaration that of influencers that this space program of billionaires are not something good, and this and that, and blah blah and blah blah. And I think there is a very real danger that in countries like the United States, the administration may become more and more hostile to private commercial spaceflight ventures. And at the same time, of course, we cannot rely on the government alone to take us back to the moon and then beyond, because we have been waiting for that for 50 years and that hasn't happened, which means that this will not happen without some game changing factor like the advent of private spaceflight. So I do not think that our expansion into space can proceed at this moment without at least some moderate support from the government. And that means that, unfortunately, politics is still very much related to spaceflight. And, of course, culture overall is also very much related to spaceflight. And these are things that I could not ignore in a book dedicated to spaceflight. As simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see this competition and conflict that is going on between U.S. and China help development of further and further technology that I would imagine that you're considering space exploration to be the objective and goal of all of these technological
Yes.
advancement that we're experiencing, correct?
Not only space exploration, space expansion is not exploration for the sake of science. It's much deeper than that. It is that we need to expand our habitat, our human habitat, beyond this planet. And, it's not exploring Mars to see what Mars is like. It's more settling Mars to enable large numbers of people to eventually live there and then move beyond. So yes, space expansion is what I'm really interested in.
Do you see the conflict between U.S. and China helps this space expansion as a matter of survival, if not anything else?
Yes, it is really a matter of survival, and helps. It can help in two different ways. One is that China will just go to the moon and will just colonize Mars. And this is the possibility that over the rest of this century, it will be China that leads human expansion in the solar system. And if this happens, I think this is good. I mean, what it's important for me is that humanity expands beyond the Earth. Now, whether that humanity is American humanity or Chinese humanity or African or whatever is a very secondary consideration to me. The important thing is that we do it as human beings. Who does it first? It's less important. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of today's China. On the contrary, I am very critical of today's China, because I keep reading about this. How do they call it? Social control system, something like that.
Social credit score.
What they basically want, social credit score. What they basically want to achieve is a society where everyone is monitored from the cradle to the grave, 24/7. Every day by the government. And of course, they will be monitoring the compliance of the citizens to all that the Chinese Communist Party thinks is good. And I think this is no good. I'm not a fan of that kind of social organization, not at all. But while I'm not a fan of the social organization system of today's China, I am a fan of humanity moving to settle space. So if it is inevitable that China takes the lead, then I say, okay, why not? Welcome to China. Now, of course, for me, this is easier to say than for an American, because I'm not an American. So I have, had and still have a great admiration for America. I'm not a citizen. I do not live in America. So that, if it's America or China, if you ask me that, okay, well, I would like to see a continued leadership of America, but if it has to be China, so be it. But going back to America, what I think is that at this moment, the only thing that can revitalize the US space program and make sure that it stays vital is competition with China. in this example, competition is good. If there is an immediate and credible threat that China could be about to achieve space supremacy in the cislunar space, and of course convert that space supremacy into geopolitical and even military advantage here on the Earth. That, I think, would be something that no American administration, regardless of its political color, could ever afford to ignore. And I think that is happening now, and I think it is good. I mean, without China, I'm not very optimistic about the US administration to give any damn about space. With China, they have to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Space maximalism, basically. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen for as long as we get to where we're supposed to be getting, which is popularizing the solar system first and then beyond with humanity.
Yes.
I think this is a good time to read the beginning of your book and then get some ideas from you that why this was right now was the right time to write and publish this book. You're saying in the introduction, we must strenuously push toward our cosmic destiny among the stars, beginning to expand beyond the Earth before it's too late is our most important task at this moment in history. Many actors have important roles to play, and there's room for everyone. Spaceflight will also help find viable solutions for current developmental, environmental, and social problems. But the road to the stars is full of impediments and roadblocks. We will not advance as fast as we wish. Therefore, we must keep our moods strenuous and our drive strong. We need an optimistic spaceflight culture oriented to the future, with energizing visions of interplanetary, interstellar, and cosmic futures. We also need a futurist space philosophy, which I totally agree. And that's exactly why I said that this war over the ethos that is now being politicized is essential with respect to our technological advancement and space expansion.
Yes, well, you have read the first two paragraphs of the book, and after that, perhaps there is no need that you read the rest of the book, because what I wanted is to say in these very short paragraphs exactly what the book was about. But no, I'm joking. I think you
That's
want
the
to read
thesis.
my book. You'll
That is
find,
the thesis of your
very
book.
other,
Yes.
Right. Yes, and I think, yes, I'm saying the most important things here. First, that, moving beyond the Earth, living all over the solar system, one day living even the solar system beyond and moving to other stars, is it is the most important thing, because it's what we have to do. It's built in our genes. That's what humans do. And it's also kind of an obligation to the Earth, to life, and to the very universe, an obligation that we have to bring life out there. Of course, there is other life out there, but we have something to add, and adding this something that we can add is an existential imperative for humanity. So this is my consideration number one. Now, it's a philosophical position, and I cannot expect everyone else to automatically agree with my philosophical position if I don't persuade them first. And persuading them has to be based on arguments that they can accept. That's why I dedicate a big part of the book to describe some practical benefits in terms of economy, in terms of national security, in terms of environmental protection, social justice that spaceflight will bring. I tried to persuade those who do not immediately relate to my overall philosophical position that we must expand into space because we must expand into space, because it's our cosmic destiny. So this was the second important thing. The third important thing is a reflection on the history of the last few decades, where you are younger than me.
A little bit.
And you were not on July 20, 1969, you were not even alive. I was 11 years old, and I was watching this extremely bad quality video image on a black and white TV. And I was like, oh, this is our future, and this is my future. I was a kid. I thought that when I turned 25 or 30, there would be a city on the moon where I could move to.
This is where we landed on the moon. I'm just saying for people who don't know. Yes.
Yeah. We had so many great expectations, all the kids of my generation. And we have been frustrated because after 1972, we have never been back to the moon. Now we might be back to the moon before the end of this decade, perhaps. I'm not even 100% sure of that. So maybe things are moving again. But one thing is sure, is that it has taken a lot more than we thought. And things will continue to be that way. I mean, it's inevitable then in a complex world with technology, finance, politics, and culture, and all that, we will not advance as fast as we would like to advance on the road to the stars. But we need to keep our enthusiasm alive. And here is where I come to the paramount importance of cultural factors. We need to engineer cultural factors that permit a sustainable space program over the next few decades, regardless of all the roadblocks and the difficulties and lack of money and political opposition that we will inevitably encounter. This is the importance of popularizing space. This is the importance of good science fiction. This is the importance of new spiritual movements related to the space expansion of humanity. These things are extremely important, and this is what my own work is mostly related to.
You had mentioned in the book that you start writing it right after the first launch of astronauts by SpaceX reusable rocket, right? What
Yes.
made you think that this is the right time to write this book, and who exactly are you talking to? Is it general public, or is this a specific group of people with influence and power? What was the objective, and what inspired it when it did?
If those in the general public want to read my book, I can only be happy of that. At the same time, I understand that those who do not already agree with me on most things may find it difficult to relate personally to my book, because I say very clearly that to me, spaceflight is important in itself. I say that spaceflight is the most important thing, and that is my philosophical position. Many people won't like that. From many comments that I've received, many people actually don't like that. So that the book is mostly directed at space enthusiasts like me, who do share my philosophical convictions, and I give them a lot of practical arguments and consideration in support of spaceflight, in support of human expansion into space, because I hope that they can use these arguments and considerations when talking to others. So I'm not credible to many because I am too much of a space enthusiast, but perhaps some of my readers are. For example, there is some kind of tension between enthusiasm for space and enthusiasm for things like protecting the environment from climate change. These are seen entirely erroneously, in my opinion, as two conflicting goals. On the contrary, I offer some arguments to understand that these are not conflicting goals, but on the contrary, they are complementary goals that reinforce each other, and in particular, space, expanding into space is really the only way to protect the environment of the Earth in the long term. And here I'm talking of things like, for example, offshoring some heavily polluting heavy industry to space. I'm talking of things like extracting energy from space and using it on the Earth. Right? In the last few days, there have been, for example, papers about space-based solar power. And this is another consideration. If we can extract energy up there and use it down here, that means we don't have to extract the energy down here in the first place. There is the possibility, and that is specifically related to the moon, that mining the moon for helium-3 could provide inexhaustible reserves of fuels for future nuclear fusion reactors. And in the last few days, interesting synchronicity, we are also hearing a lot of the fact that nuclear fusion is becoming a viable operational technology. At the end, these are so many things that are conspiring, to put it like that, to make people understand that if we want to protect the environment of the Earth, then we need to expand into space beyond the Earth. That will only be beneficial for the planet. So that this is an entire chapter of my book, and it's something that, if you have some environmentalist friends of the people who are fans of Greta Thunberg, for example, you can use these arguments to persuade them that space is good for the environment of the Earth. And then they can use these arguments to persuade other people and so on.
I think one of the problems that a lot of people do have to even begin to comprehend the value and viability of the idea of space expansion goes back to inequality and class issues here on Earth, because for a lot of people it's a matter of how they're going to survive the next day, And so even talking about this, the space
Yes.
is kind of, they take it as offensive because they're like, we don't even care. We just want to survive and raise our family. And so when you're focusing on space, it means that you're ignoring all the problems that we are dealing with here on Earth. And so, I'm being called a leftist for talking about inequality. And like, for example, I'm absolutely in favor of UBI as
So
yeah,
am
I
I.
mean, they're
So am
inevitable.
I.
We're dealing with explosion of technological tools because they're advancing exponentially, and our experiences linear. But at the same time, I understand if I talk to somebody about space expansion, that person look at me in a very strange way, like I just want my kid to survive at school and I be able to pay my rent.
And this is a point that I completely understand. And here again, I made many considerations in the book to show that it is not so. Expanding into space does not, in the long term, take important resources away from important things that we should do here on the Earth. On the contrary, space expansion is an enabler for all these things. And an analogy that could be done is what happened in the United States in the 19th century, where people started to move west. No, it's not like everyone was happy in New York. It's not like everyone had enough to eat in New York. But, and it was a very wise move, the government decided to encourage, and they had to spend money on this, of course. They decided to encourage a mass movement toward the West. They did that with financial incentives and things like that. And, that didn't directly change the condition of the poor people in New York. Not directly and not immediately, but eventually it did. What happened eventually is that the expansion of the United States toward the Pacific Ocean was one of the factors that made the United States the most advanced economy in the world. And there are still some people who go hungry in New York today, but I think we can agree that there are not as many as the people who went hungry 150 years ago. So that ultimately the expansion of the habitat of the US population that was only living on the East Coast, it has eventually resulted in economic prosperity for everyone. This is one example. Another example is much closer to us in time, and it is the development of internet technology that started in the 60s with the financial support of the government, then went kind of invisible for a couple of decades, and then started to explode in the early 80s. A few years after that, we started to see the first mobile phones. Now, perhaps you don't remember the first mobile phones. Oh, I should have taken one of my first mobile phones that I still have to show it on camera. It was
brick size.
It was heavy as a brick. I had to buy a special carrying case for it because, of course, it didn't fit in my pocket, and of course, it costed a hell of a lot.
This was what year?
This must have been like 94, 95, something like that. And something that many people said is that, well, okay, these things that you have to pay $2,000 for a mobile phone is an insult to the poor. And I can understand if some people felt insulted seeing others on the road with an expensive mobile phone. But what we used to say is that, okay, look, we are at the very early stage of a new technology. What will happen, because that's the evolution of important technologies, that the price of these things will go down and down and down, and at the same time, the performance of these things will go up. And this, even if we cannot see exactly how right now, will entirely change the world in a couple of decades. And that is exactly what happened, because now a mobile phone doesn't cost money. I mean, if you don't want to spend money, the phone company will give you the mobile phone for free if you have a contract with them. And the performance of the phones, is phenomenally better than it was 20 years ago. And now, I don't think I know anyone who doesn't have a mobile phone. And at least if we stay in the Western world, this is also true in the most underprivileged inner cities in the US and Europe. Essentially, everyone has a mobile phone. And the impact of everyone having a mobile phone is overall good. I'm persuaded of that. And the same will happen with space. Now, spaceflight costs a lot of money, and at times it's difficult to see exactly why we are going to space and what we are going to space for. But just give time to time. Just wait for a few decades, and it seems evident from so many early warning signs that we can see right now that in a few decades, it will be very evident in hindsight why we decided to expand into outer space. And it will be evident that the overall impact on humanity will have been good. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, another example of people being offended by expensive new technology was Google Glass. That when it came out, we talked a lot about that in this podcast, that when it came out, people were being attacked who were wearing them. There were also an aspect of, like an elitist aspect to it, that you couldn't just go out and buy it. You had to be chosen and be given those devices. And this is almost 10 years ago. That people were being attacked around Silicon Valley and San Francisco. All these big tech buses were being attacked. And now, politically, this is coming from the right. There is a backlash against technology altogether, and there's a revival of traditionalism. They're saying we have to go back to our traditional roots. And they all seem to be connected in the sense that technology is evolving exponentially, and we can't even comprehend it if we are not seeing the big picture. And a lot of people, not only they get offended, they get really scared. And this being scared has real world political, social, and cultural consequences that can affect what you're saying. The advancement of technology is not as fast as maybe we want it to be, or as it needs to be in order for us to survive as a species, as a civilization.
I prefer to be optimist and think that even if things will be difficult, I prefer to hope that we will make it. And even more important than that, I prefer to do all the little things that I can do to get closer to that objective. But back to the tension between technology and our cultural traditions, I don't think that there has to be an opposition. I think we can advance technology, even advance technology very fast within our cultural traditions. I mean, it would be a long discussion, but I'm not immediately persuaded that it is not the case.
Do you feel the same way about democracy as a system of governance? Because you mentioned China advancing really quickly. It, in a way, is as a consequence of a central structure of authority that they have. And here in the US, all the places basically that are developing and doing research about these technological advancements, they are being run as centralized points of authority, centralized structures of authority, like whether it's DARPA or a SpaceX or Google.
No, I'm not really a fundamentalist in this. I think there is room for many different organizational models. I do tend to have a slight preference myself for decentralized models, but if it happens that the quickest solution to an important problem can only come from a centralized structure, then I would say why not. This is the same kind of reasoning that I was making before, saying that government support is still necessary for spaceflight and space expansion. We cannot. There is nothing bad in the idea of government itself.
There's nothing bad about the idea of government itself. I guess it's just a form of government.
No, yes, it's the form. Is a management thing. Some organizational structure can be better than other organizational structures for some specific purposes, and that's it. I'm not really a fundamentalist here. I welcome many different possibilities.
It just seems like the long-term, big picture kind of a view is maybe incompatible with the system that people run on the basis of being elected and then re-elected, rather than being focused on some kind of an objective and determine policy on that basis, rather than determining policy based on the next century rather than the next 4 years. This is the reason I'm saying about democracy.
Right, but yeah, I understand this point, but here again it comes down to whether we are intelligent and pragmatic enough to work together with people who do not think in exactly the same way as we do. And as a matter of fact, reading the news now, and especially reading social media, you can develop the impression that people on the left will never accept or to work together with people on the right and the other way. But it hasn't always been like that. As a matter of fact, this is quite a new development that has accelerated in the last few years. In the past, it was a perfectly normal thing, for example, in the United States, for Democrats and Republicans to push a bill that was good for both. This is really an important thing. In fact, spaceflight, the advancement of spaceflight, needs bipartisan support. Otherwise, the rocket just doesn't take off. From the inception of a space program to its completion, it does take a long time indeed. It may be 10, it may be 15 years, it may be decades. And this can only be compatible with a system like in the United States or many Western democracies, where the color of the government changes every few years. It can only be compatible with this if there is bipartisan support. And in fact, I think this is if we keep talking of government space, there has to be bipartisan support. But since the government can also impact the space commercial sector, the government could kill Elon Musk with over-regulation anytime. So that, it's not only that we need bipartisan support for government space program, we need bipartisan support for spaceflight itself, even in the private sector, especially in the United States, in Western Europe. And, then exhortation that I give many times in this book is that, politicians, I'm not going to read, but I'm trying to quote from memory or something like that. I say somewhere that politicians of the left and politicians of the right should just let go of the toxic aspects of their respective ideologies, should just let go of their hatred for each other and just sit the fuck down to define programs that everyone is willing to live with for a while. This is exactly what needs to happen in space in the West. Now, in China, they don't have this problem, or at least this problem is not apparent. So that, yes, as you were saying, China can think long term. But this doesn't mean that we cannot think long term. And, the Chinese can think long term in their own way. Their way is not our way. So we must learn to think long term in our way. I'm not ready to let democracy go. When you first started talking about democracy, came to my mind my two favorite descriptions of democracy. So the first, I don't know who said that first, is that democracy are two wolves and a lamb deciding democratically by majority vote what to have.
One of the founding fathers, I don't exactly remember who, but one of the founding fathers said it.
Perhaps somebody important said that, and the other, and I think it was Sir Winston Churchill who said it first, is that democracy is the worst system of government, with the exception of all the other systems. So that, even in view of the structural weakness of democracy that is quite evident in the story of the two wolves and the lamb, I still think democracy is better than the alternatives that we have been trying so far.
So I just found it was said by Benjamin Franklin, democracy is two wolves and lambs voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is well-armed lamb contesting the vote. I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. I think it's makes a very different, apparent different and very obvious different when the populists are armed. I didn't know the second half of the citation. Yeah. But what you were saying is totally sensible, because spaceflight and the space expansion is about humanity. It's not about left and right, it's Democrat and Republican. These are all blocks that we are passing through to get to the point of first surviving as one humanity and then expanding into, we might be human plus or whatever that comes next after humanity. It's just that it seems like there is a battle right now about what is the definition of humanity and therefore what is the goal of humanity. That's where we are. It seems like it. And I think you're a very valuable kind of a perspective because you're bringing spirituality and quote unquote God into it, because that is the ultimate purpose and ultimate ethos of what humanity as a collective, regardless of whatever kind of ideology we have, can strive towards and can build towards that kind of an objective that is God-given, for lack of a better term.
Right. We don't even have to use explicitly the term God. I mean,
you finished a book with it.
Some people want. Yeah. Yes, I did. I finished the book with a quite unconventional concept of God. Unconventional in the sense that my God is not a supernatural God. I mean, I think the concept of supernatural doesn't make any sense to me. Because if you define nature as all that exists, then supernatural doesn't exist by definition. So everything is natural. Now, of course, we may have to expand your definition of nature to make room for things that do exist in nature. So there is an overall organizational principle in the universe that kind of pulls the universe above toward increasing levels of complexity and generates intelligent life. Well, first it generates non-intelligent life, then it generates intelligent life, then it may generate one day super-intelligent life. And one aspect of this principle of increasing complexity and penetration of consciousness and intelligence in the whole universe, one aspect of this is that we must go to space, we must leave the Earth, we must bring our DNA, our culture everywhere in the universe, among the stars. This is a universal principle that you don't have to call God, but you can call God if you want. And I think this is what traditional religions refer to in the most abstract parts of their theology. Then, besides that, you have the evolution of superintelligence itself. We will go to the stars, we will expand among the stars, and humanity itself will be changed. We will edit our genome. We will perhaps upload our minds to computational systems much more powerful than a biological brain. We will do all these things, and we will ascend toward godlike levels and conditions that we probably are not even able to imagine now. And so many countless other alien civilizations in the universe must have done exactly the same things. And this is another reason why we must go to the stars, to find features among the stars. Civilization much more advanced than ours. And one of the things that I have in the last chapter of my book that you were referring to is a wonderful quote by Stanley Kubrick, the director of 2001, Space Odyssey, where I don't remember to quote by heart, but if you read the book, just read it. He's saying in very few words that out there in the universe there exist beings so inconceivably advanced from our point of view that we can only call them gods. Whatever else, whatever other name will be a lack of honesty. So there are gods out there, and this is another religious concept. What Stanley Kubrick did not say, but his collaborator Arthur C. Clarke did say that, is that we ourselves, if we are lucky, and if we do things well, we ourselves may become a godlike civilization in the future. And that, again, is among the ultimate objectives of our quest to go to the stars. We have to go to the stars out there to do all that.
Yeah, and now there are philosophical and, dare I say, religious attempts are being made in order to create some kind of an ethos on this exact basis that you're saying, whether it's simulation, hypothesis, or theory, or Jason Giorgiani's Prometheism. These are all coming from traditional religions, breaking the mold and moving towards whatever that is coming next, which I think they're very valuable.
Yes, in fact, I've been listening to your interviews with Jason Giorgiani and to your two separate interviews with Ritz van Werk. And yes, basically, when Ritz says that his version of the simulation hypothesis is a necessary adaptation of the metaphors that religion use to communicate to people, I think he's totally right. Hold on one moment, I think I need to put the power cable into my computer. Here we go.
Amazing. I had Jason Giorgiani twice. I don't know if you listened to both of them.
No, I listened to one.
Yeah, I had him.
I will look for the other. The first one was when his Prometheism book came out, maybe a few months ago. And the second one was after that?
Yeah, after that, he wrote a book called Closer Encounters about UFOs. And this came out basically as a response to the U.S. government report on UFOs.
Oh, I need to read that.
I really like him. I mean, he's a very controversial kind of a figure because of, some of his views. But I think he's extremely unique, and he dares going to places that, not that many people, I don't think, can't even begin comprehending the possibility of them.
I liked his book. Maybe I didn't like 100% of it, but I certainly did like a good 80% of it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that is a pleasure that you've been listening to the interviews that I've done with them. Two of my favorite guests, definitely. What are some of the characteristics of the ethos that you would recommend for humanity to have in order to move to the point that we can decide as humanity rather than left and right, black and white, Democrat and Republican and all that?
I don't have a name for it. The name that comes closer to my mind is cosmism, as from the Russian cosmist philosophical movements that started in Russia between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. But they used a language that we find very much outdated now. I mean, if you read the writings of Russian cosmist philosopher, you wouldn't understand much, and perhaps you wouldn't like what you read. Thinking of more contemporary examples, I will talk of an excellent book written. Excuse me one moment, I just need to tell my wife to turn the water off. Yeah, that is background noise. There is an author called Stephen Wolfson who wrote a great book called The Obligation. By the way, if you never had Steve on the podcast, you should definitely on the show. You should definitely have him. It's a very short book, and he says much better, perhaps, the same things that I say. That all these things that we have been discussing, moving beyond the Earth, living in the solar system, moving to other stars, leaving the Earth behind, are our obligation to ourselves, our obligation to the Earth itself, our obligation to life, our obligation to the universe, and even so Stephen doesn't use explicitly religious words, our obligation to God. Now, this is the ethos that I recommend, which is basically a reformulation of the cosmist ethos in language that is more understandable to people here and now. Let's feel this obligation that we have to ourselves and to the universe around us to contribute to awaken the universe to life, consciousness, superintelligence, and perhaps godlike nature. This is our obligation. This is what we are here for.
When earlier you said, of course there are, excuse me, of course there are other lives beyond Earth. On what basis do you say that? On what kind of a life? Are you talking about conscious life or just like bacterial life? Oh, well, bacteria, I guess it could be conscious too, but you know what I mean.
Bacterial life and animal
Sentient.
life and human-like life and conscious life and super-conscious life. There is room for all possible sorts of life. As a matter of fact, I'm persuaded that life is not an accident. It's not the result of... excuse me one moment. I have to tell my wife again that she wants to cook dinner, so perhaps
it's all good, man. It happens. Things just happen.
Just take 5 more minutes, and after that,
okay,
I
right
have to
on.
go. But this thing about life is important. Life is not a random accident that happened as a result of a random fluctuation that happened but could not have happened. I have a completely different view. I think that the very laws of fundamental physics are wired to eventually produce complexity, life, consciousness, intelligence, superintelligence, and godlikeness. It could not have been another way. It has to be this way. One consequence is that there is life everywhere. It's not ruled out that we will find some elementary examples of life here in the solar system. For example, there is a mission planned to one of the ice moons in the outer solar system that may have an ocean which may harbor life. We will find something in the solar system, and when we eventually move out to the stars, we will find all sorts of life, from simple life to societies like our human civilization, to inconceivably more advanced alien societies. We will find all that.
Great.
Sure.
I'm not going to keep you much further from the delicious dinner that I'm sure your wife is preparing, and my best to your wife as well. Giulio Prisco's book,
Thank you
Giulio
very
Prisco's
much.
book is called Futurist Spaceflight Meditations. Check him out all over internet. Wonderful. I'm also showing the cover and the Amazon page and all that. Just please share your message to the humanity as the final saying of this episode of podcast.
Let's just go to space.